Welcome to the HFMA Board and Officer Onboarding for the Washington, Alaska chapter. First, I'd like to review with you the snapshot of the Board Director commitment, then go over a little bit about our chapter overview, some of the job description and expectations for a Board Director, leadership development opportunities, the officer job descriptions, enterprise membership, chapter awards we'll briefly go over, travel and expense policy briefly, DeMar's overview, and then there are archived a number of past committee descriptions and leadership positions. Those are archived, but each year the president has at their discretion to be able to use those descriptions and be able to appoint what positions as they deem necessary. I'm going to read over a lot of this verbatim just because it's really important, especially the commitment known that you've made as a chapter board director or as an officer. First of all, for the board, your term is a 2-year term that begins June 1st, although you'll begin to attend some of the board meetings ahead of time, especially in March around the time of our annual spring conference. During the spring conference, as the new board and officers are sworn in and installed, you'll begin serving during the spring conference before June 1st to attend board meetings, leadership calls, budget formation, and the formation of New Year committees. Being a board director means much more than attending at least 4 chapter board meetings. It's a commitment to be a committee chair for at least one appointed area by the president-elect and lead this volunteer committee with recurring calls or meetings during the fiscal year. Please see a list a little bit farther below. This will give you an estimated time commitment for what it means to be a board director. The volunteer summit is where new leadership is picked by the incoming president and where the incoming president meets with the board, officers, and new and potential volunteers to plan the upcoming year. And that volunteer summit is typically at the annual spring conference. Leadership Training Conference is a national event that the chapter will send at least 6 people to. Attendees are chosen by the president-elect and may not always be board directors, and those travel expenses for that training are reimbursed by the chapter for the attendees. To be known by the committee members, which are, of course, the board directors as well as officers, an event planning company, DeMar's Meetings and Events, works with the chapter leadership as a chapter admin. DeMar's is contracted to work on event contracts and organizing events, communicating with speakers once they've agreed to speak, business partner sponsorship tracking, facilitate communications for our members and other areas. And so what's really important here is that the DeMar's contract is discussed annually to decipher and understand what DeMar's is contracted to provide in chapter support and compare that alongside what the chapter leadership agrees to have volunteers cover. And that's covered very thoroughly in the contract and is reviewed by the chapter president track team. And the chapter president track, when I refer the president track, those are the 3 officers: the president-elect, and the secretary-treasurer. And that secretary-treasurer is one person. Here's the estimated time commitment to the chapter: at least 4 board meetings, estimated 2 hours each throughout the year. And going to that, I've actually got a graphic here shown here in Excel. This is the board meeting topics and the meeting dates for the 2022-23 year. I want to focus your attention just on the dates here. There's 4 different meetings, and you see the topics that are covered. The one we have coming up during the annual spring conference will cover the annual meeting, install officers, and committee leaders will be approved. And so this is a virtual meeting. It was going to be in person, but we decided to go with a virtual meeting so that we can use all of our face-to-face time more so for fun and for interaction and networking and education. Moving back to the estimated time commitment, so that was the 4 board meetings. Attend chapter conferences in person when possible. Usually those conferences are 1 to 3 days. Attend the Western Region Symposium when possible. That's our Region 11 event. And Region 11 described is all of the chapters that make up that region. Region 11 and Region 10 and 11 actually put on the Western Region Symposium, and that lasts 3 to 4 days, usually every January. Also, a board commitment could be, it's by invitation only from the president-elect, be attending the Leadership Training Conference, and that's 3 days, usually in April every year. It's a national event. The chapter will cover the expenses. The Volunteer Summit, as I mentioned, is the annual spring conference, usually in March. Committee calls, depending on the chapter area, so that could be 1 to 3 hours per month. And then committee planning, networking, and events, where travel varies. So these are the other commitments that could fall under your time and your commitment as a board director. In this pack is information about the national organization, where there's nearly 100,000 members currently, from CFOs, controllers, accountants. And I'm going to actually allow you to read this. It's a lot of really good high-level information about HFMA's vision and values. For the Washington, Alaska chapter information, we are geographically the largest of the 68 chapters covering Washington and Alaska. It was formed in 1953, so we're actually on a very significant anniversary this year. Looking at this too, we can see the different chapters that make up Region 11, and the region is then led by an annually appointed regional executive, and you'll hear the terms or acronyms used for regional executive called RE1, RE2, and RE3, and that actually means the succession of leadership as this position rotates each year through the 7 chapters of the region. Well, actually, what that means is there's 3 regional executives. One is the actual one, then there's one that is appointed in successive years as the regional executive elect. Jumping to the board director job description and expectations. A board director is expected to attend all board meetings in person or virtually, chair or co-chair, actively participate in one of our councils or committees. We actually only have committees now, so this needs to be revised. As chair or co-chair, you attend planning sessions in person or facilitate someone to be there in the leadership role. You are leading these committees, so it's really, even though these are volunteer roles, there's a lot of intentionality, and we look for those, especially you as being a board director, to be one that is showing initiative and a self-starter. If you're a co-chair and cannot attend a meeting or planning a conference call, make sure to have someone liaison or be someone there prior to the meeting. Also part of your role too is to be able to recruit volunteers that you want to work with and you want to oversee and participate in the planning of sessions or planning of your committee and what your committee work will be. Jumping down here to chapter officer expectations. Chapter officers will do this first: fulfill the duties as outlined in the chapter bylaws, fulfill additional duties as assigned by the board or president, attend all board meetings in person or virtually, have a copy of the bylaws and chapter success plan, and attend weekly officer calls led by the president. So the weekly officer calls are ones that we used to call the president track call, which only the president-elect, and secretary-treasurer, but then we expanded that to include the VPs, the VP of Innovation, and the VP of Programs, in order to have all of the officers attend and be in the know of what's happening at the chapter, at the officer level. Now, the board director expectations: fulfilling the duties as assigned by the board, fulfill additional duties assigned by the board or president, attend all board meetings in person or virtually, have a copy of the bylaws and chapter success plan. The chapter success plan is something worked on each year. As an aside, the chapter officers got together in September of 2022, had an officer retreat, put together a lot of information for the success plan for the upcoming year, 23-24, and that'll be discussed at the Volunteer Summit. So there's a lot of planning that happened in the fall that's even actually rolled out and continues through the spring conference. For the board director too, you're expected to lead a committee or committees and report out monthly, and attend the monthly leadership call. And that's led by the president. That's by President Ann Peterson. She will send out an invite for that to you. As I shared before, there's leadership development for those who are prepared to be leaders for each year for the chapter. That's the leadership training conference, and again, the incoming president will lead the planning for this. and this is by invitation only. If you're interested in attending, please let her know. Please let Ann Peterson know as our incoming president. I won't go over all the job descriptions here, but I want to just glance over them for the officers for the chapter. The chapter president here, as you can see here, serves as the chief executive officer of the chapter, presides at all meetings, especially of the board of directors, chapter membership, and represents the chapter at president's meeting, at LTC, ANI, which is actually now called the annual conference, the fall president's meeting, which is actually now the day before the annual conference in June each year, and then Region 11, which, as I said earlier, is the January conference for the region in Las Vegas every year in January. The president-elect will serve also on the executive committee. A lot of the similar responsibilities, including filling in for the president in the absence of the president. There is also a number of areas here. It says Plan Mini LTC, which is actually what really is our volunteer summit. Used to be called Mini LTC, and plans the structure for the upcoming year. And that's what Anna's done already, as far as looking at what the structure is for the year, who's going to be leading her committees, and be part of her leadership team. Past president, which would be myself, is still a voting director according to the bylaws, but is not considered an officer anymore of the chapter. The past president will chair the nominating committee, as well as issue election ballots for the chapter membership, receive ballots back. So actually I looked further into the bylaws and some changes that are occurring, and this also needs to be revised as I speak here. The secretary treasurer will actually be the one who will issue the election ballots, and then work with a board director or two in order to facilitate the election process. That election process typically begins in November of each calendar year and goes through the election in December or January, and then the results come out in January or February, so that we can kick off the installation of the new board and officers in March at our spring conference. The secretary treasurer is a role that we actually combined just in the past year. It looks like there is a plethora of information here and responsibilities, yet the relief here is that the treasurer portion of this is outsourced to a company called AG1, and then there are a number of secretary duties here that help support the admin pillar for the chapter. Briefly, the Vice President Program Chair. This actually is, we call that Vice President for Programs, and also there's also a Vice President second position called Vice President Innovation. Those descriptions are here briefly. Some things will need to be updated, but this gives a general information of what the the Vice President for Education covers for the conferences during the year. And next I will go over the pillar structure, so you understand when I say pillars, what we're referring to, and which officers and roles are in that pillar structure. What I'm showing here is actually a succession plan for our chapter that goes pretty deep for the Washington, Alaska chapter. As you can see on the top left here, the 2022 through 2026 succession planning document. We have this in Google Sheets. And as you can see here in red, this will show the pillars of our chapter. One pillar is called the community pillar, and each pillar has an executive sponsor and then an operational leader. The executive sponsor is the president for the community pillar over the areas of innovation, membership, and communications for the chapter, and the operational leader for this area is the VP of Innovation. Moving to the right here, the connections pillar executive sponsor is the president-elect, and the operational leader here is the VP of Programs. So the VP of Programs is an operational leader, VP of Innovation is an operational leader. partnering together. So partnering together, the president-elect will partner with the VP of programs under connections. And again, the president will partner with the VP of innovation under the community pillar. The third and final pillar is the administration pillar. And this, as you might guess, is the executive sponsor, is the secretary treasurer. And that covers the newsletter, recognition and awards, nominating committee for future leaders, as well as DMARS and AG1, which are the contracted services. DMARS for our administrative areas, AG1 for our treasury function, and then what also could fall into here as well is Recraft Media, an outsourced media company that we have used for a number of our conferences. A brief tour of our website. Here is a long URL to the website. You can also type in whac.hfma.org. It'll also come to this website. You can see that here, whac.hfma.org. It'll route right back to our website. So if you ever need to give it out, whac.hfma.org, then it's more memorable. What we put in here is, this is our new website as of early 2022. We have a number of very helpful areas to come to, especially upcoming events that is updated constantly. We recently had a networking event at LeMay Car Museum in Tacoma, and we've got our monthly events coming up. A volunteer summit, of course, the spring conference, Alaska conference, Mariners baseball suites, which for this year are July 20th and August 30th. So July 20th and August 30th, annual women's conference and everything. So if you ever need to send someone to say what's happening in our chapter, including as board directors as well as officers, you may encounter business partners interested in sponsoring their chapter, and you can send them right here and say, we have many events for you to partake in and be part of and sponsor. This includes also another section called monthly connections to the chapter, where Kim Polanco, our membership chair currently, does every Thursday of the month a Zoom meeting here, and the link is right here. You can come here and come at that time, noon to 1 Pacific, and that's for new members to the chapter to have questions answered, and then all the way down here through networking events through the year. So lots here, and then there's also down here the President's Message, President's Welcome, which will change to be Ann's President's Welcome here soon. And there's also a link here for a provider, a healthcare provider, to win a trip to the Mariners game. Actually, admittance to the game. We don't pay for the trip. But and also a place for the president to receive an email from anyone who would be inquiring. Another website that's really important is the Western Region Symposium website. You can see that here, Western Symposium. These were the dates that had occurred this year, and it shows a number of our sponsorship opportunities. The reason I think this is really important is because the revenue streams that make our chapter go and grow includes money from the Western Region Symposium. All the chapters from Region 11 and 10 send people to this symposium, and we get a cut and a share of the profits from this. So it really, really helps us, including providers and business partners, to come there, register as a Washington, Alaska chapter member, and be able, and that will allow us to have a revenue stream that comes to our chapter. Another revenue stream to our chapter is our sponsors, and I'll go back to our Washington, Alaska page to show you that. The annual partners here, I'll click on that on the left, and you'll see here that there's sponsorship opportunities for event sponsorships, summary of sponsorship benefits and sponsorship benefits. And you see that our sponsors are laid out here really well on this page. What's not here is actually our Mariners sponsorships, which are individual event sponsorships. They're exclusive to that event, meaning none of these level sponsors can just show up to that event. It's only those who are sponsors of the Mariners suite that day are the ones that can come, and that provides them an exclusive opportunity to reach out to providers, and not only the ones that they bring in the package that they purchase, but also to reach out to those that that others bring. All right, coming back to our onboarding document, Talking a little bit about our enterprise membership, HFMA kicked off these corporate memberships in around 2016. All employees of those organizations are eligible to sign up to be a member. That's why our chapter membership has exploded from a little over 400 to over 2,200 members because of organizations that have signed up for this benefit and this opportunity to educate their employees and be a part of a professional organization. As you can see here, there's exclusive HFMA member content and education. I won't go through all these in detail. I did write here a comment about PSGH, which is Providence St. Joseph Health. This is one of the first companies that was an enterprise member. Some of them stay contracted with enterprise, some of them don't. Providence chose not to, but others have stayed enterprise membership members as corporate members. And with any of the memberships, including individual memberships and enterprise memberships, all memberships have the opportunity to make strong connections with the local geographic area, meaning with the chapter, with our chapter, Washington, Alaska. There's a section here about chapter awards, also founders awards, which are national awards. I'm going to skip this so that you can look at this, but you can just count on chapter awards being given at the annual spring conference. In this packet also is the HFMA travel and expense policy. This covers a broad range of areas that are covered for travel expenses, especially when I scroll down here, the following meetings are normally planned for during the fiscal year: the annual conference for the past president, and president-elect, the fall president's meeting for president-elect, Region 11, a few, mainly it's the president and past president that are covered, and then the LTC for all officers and those invited. It says up to 4 board directors, and that's only if the board directors are invited by the president. Sometimes the incoming president will invite board. Others may not. They may invite a volunteer who may not be a board person. So I wanted to show you this because mainly what the chapter covers are for officer, for the president president and president-elect. Another section of our onboarding packet shows DeMarce meetings overview. This really shows in general what DeMarce does for our chapter. Chapter administrative services, treasury support, sponsorship management, event management. A lot of these things here, again, really important to be able to review with the president at some point during the year to make sure there is a understanding of what each does to make the chapter go, whether it's a volunteer, whether DeMarce does that. I think, speaking frankly, past friction has occurred when there's not been a clear understanding of what DeMarce does, when there's an expectation there, but it's actually not a warranted expectation. It's because it's not in their contract to do, it's for a volunteer to do. And that's really on the officers of the chapter to determine and make sure that the volunteers know what they do and DeMarce already knows what they do. The final section here is archived or past committee scope and descriptions. These are committees that have been used by the VP of programs to develop content for our conferences. And so like here it says Committee A, Compliance, Policy, and Finance Committee. There's Revenue Cycle, PFS, Keynote Speakers. So these committees in some years have been utilized by the VP of Programs. Other years, the VP of Programs may decide to pull together a smaller huddle of people to put the conference together. So that's really up to the officer leadership about what approach to take each year. This year, I believe with the Volunteer Summit, a lot more of the planning of the conferences will occur there and not necessarily in these committees, but this is left for archival purposes as reference for chapter leaders to not have to reinvent the wheel, but can look at past committee scope and job descriptions. To wrap up this video, I pulled up a calendar for the calendar year 2023. I know this is a little bit small, but I just want to provide some high-level perspective of what's happening in the chapter. And we're currently it's March 6th. We've got our annual spring conference next week. and our third board meeting on the 20th. Then after the 20th, all the way through April, is a lot of planning by the VP of programs, putting together conference budgets for the 2023-2024 fiscal HFMA year, which starts June 1st. So as you can imagine, we're doing the budget, all the budgets of each conference, rolling them up into the annual budget in April. End of April, that last week, we want to meet as officers to review it and vet it to make sure it is what we would like to present to the board. And then on May 1st is when the last board meeting of the year will be, but it projects the budget for the new year starting June 1st. And then looking into June, this will be the start of Ann's president's year. I will be past president. And then June 23rd is the women's event, just to give some perspective of calendar. July, I think, is pretty quiet for our chapter, although we will continue to do networking events through each month like we started in December of 2022. As we get into September, we're going to do our social with the Oregon chapter, probably pickleball in Centralia. Then October, we'll have our fall conference in Spokane, so October 10th through the 13th. And then as we get into November through December, we're already planning the next year. Well, we're actually looking for who the next president will be, who the next secretary treasurer will be on the president track, because the president track is a 4-year commitment, really, of secretary treasurer, then president-elect, then president, and then past president, excuse me. So 4 different roles through the year. That's called the president track. And so that begins in November with the nominating committee, and then we send out the ballot usually in December, and then we're starting right into January of 2024, if you will, and then we get into January and February preparation for our March annual conference again, as well as our Alaska conference in 2024. So hopefully, I wanted to show this to you to give a flavor of kind of the rhythm and flow of our chapter, and I hope you've enjoyed this onboarding. I know you'll have questions, and the final note I'll tell you is that Marnie, our president-elect for 23-24, Marnie Leonard will be putting together mentor buddies. So that will mean that if you're a new board member, you will be paired up with someone who's a veteran board member, or if you're a new officer in a new role, you'll be paired up with somebody who's been in the role prior, in order to meet monthly and be able to discuss your role further. And here's a final note from Marnie about the mentoring. The vision she has for us is that there be a connection to get to know each other, to answer questions, address concerns, discuss goals in the progression track, and progression through the year, and brainstorm ideas. But at least meet monthly, like here, number 3, is really the intent, to keep it simple, keep a connection, and going over concerns and answering questions as somebody is new in the role. We want to make sure there's continuity and a good handoff of one role to the next, from one year to the next. Thank you for listening. I know I've kept this to under 30 minutes. I hope, again, if you have any questions, please let me know at whackpresident@gmail.com if you have any questions or concerns right away. Otherwise, have a great year.